Welcome to Meet the Thriller Author, the podcast where we dive deep into the crafts, stories, and minds behind today's most riveting thriller novels. I'm your host, Alan Peterson, and this is episode number 209. I'm thrilled to have Noelle West Ihli as a guest for this episode. 2024 has brought us some incredible books, and Noelle is hands down one of my favorite thriller author discoveries of this year. Her novels are heart-stopping, haunting, and full of nail-biting suspense, the kind that keeps you on the edge of your seat, flipping pages late into the night. Whether it's her unique approach to the survival thrillers or the complex, fierce characters she creates, there's a lot to admire in her work. So today we're going to talk to her. We're going to explore what inspires her stories, how she creates such powerful suspense, and get a peek into her writing journey and creative process. But before we jump into our conversation with Noelle, here's a quick reminder. My latest psychological thriller, Imposter Syndrome, is out now. It's on sale for 99 cents. So be sure to grab your copy at thrillingreads.com/imposter. If you're a fan of twisted secrets, intense suspense, and mind-bending revelations, this one's for you. All right, let's get into it. Here's my conversation with Noelle West Ihli. Hey, everybody, this is Alan with Meet the Thriller Author. And on the podcast today, I have Noelle West Ihli, who writes some awesome psychological thrillers. Been reading her books the last couple of months. I'm really glad that she agreed to join me here on the podcast. How you doing, Noelle?
I'm great. I'm so glad to be here, Alan. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I was excited when you said yes. So these thrillers that you write, were you a fan of the genre before you actually started writing them?
Absolutely. Thrillers are pretty much exclusively what I read. I scare myself nightly with whatever true crime documentary Netflix insists I will love. I'm a super fan of the genre.
All right. Yeah. I mean, I love those true crime documentaries as well, too. It's kind of funny either I'm reading it or watching it. My wife's like, would you try something different?
My husband says the same thing. We have some palate cleansers with whatever trashy reality TV show is hot at the moment. So we balance it out.
Yeah. It works out in the end. What was your journey then from like being a reader of the genre, a fan, to thinking that you were going to try writing one? Did you always want to be a writer, or how was that journey for you?
I always thought I would stay behind the scenes. I studied editing in college. I worked for a very small publishing house afterwards. Got a lot of great firsthand experience with all the different aspects of the publishing and editing process. It took me way too long to be like, I'm ghostwriting, I'm editing, I'm doing all of these things, and I'm never putting my own name on it. Like maybe I should give this a whirl. And it was a very delayed light bulb moment, but it happened, and it was something I'd been training for my whole life and didn't even realize it. So I've always loved to read thrillers. I've always loved to edit and write. Very familiar with the publication process. So it all just finally clicked a few years ago.
Oh, so what was your first book that you published?
It was The Thicket. That came out in 2021. A few years before that, I had gone down the rabbit hole of querying the traditional route, and I finally decided I would go it on my own, and the rest is history, I guess. But yeah, back in 2021 is when I finally hit publish on that novel.
And what were some of the books that you read before and authors that inspired you to like in the thriller genre?
I loved Harlan Coben and Mary Higgins Clark. They were two of the OGs that I read through all of their backlist. I love Lisa Jewell, Jess Lowry. But yeah, I think it was Mary Higgins Clark, the All Around the Town. I don't know if you've read that one by her, but I just remember clutching my covers and reading that one when I was probably 12 years old. And it just inspired me in the creepiest way, I guess, but fantastic book. Love Mary. She's an OG.
Yeah, I'm gonna go check that one out. I've read a couple of your books, and they're great. Obviously, they're doing so well. Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you.
I noticed that your books feature like big survival elements of survivors. They're usually out in the wilderness somewhere creepy. What drives you to writing about in that certain areas? Is that something that's just always interested you?
Yeah, I mean, write what you know, right? So I write from my own anxieties about things that scare me, which is a lot of things. So I'm filling my head with these true crime stories and then going hiking and So it gives me a lot of time to let these stories percolate about some of the worst scenarios that I can come up with in my own mind. And then I've always leaned more thriller than horror, and nobody can win an argument about what that means exactly. But to me, that leans a little more on the survivor side of things rather than the catastrophic scene ends in blood and gore. So I identify with the survivor mindset, I guess, a little more than the catastrophic gore. But yeah, I guess it's because I can imagine myself in those situations, however scary they might be, or listening to true crime podcasts or watching true crime and seeing people who look like me a lot of times in those situations. And then that author brain takes over and adding a little bit of that creative license.
Yeah, I think that's what's so much fun about this genre, especially the psychological thrillers, because I read a lot of the procedural stuff, and then I got into the psychological thrillers a couple of years ago, and I think that's what's the fun part because you can see ourselves like, oh, like I could be like that. I can't be like a FBI agent, but
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is what it comes down to for me as well. It's so immersive to be able to be like, wow, that's an everyday person just like me, and that maybe could really happen. And what would I do in that situation if it were me?
I read that ask for Andrea, and that was such a great take. It was so different too because you really focused a lot on the victims of a serial killer. So I was kind of curious what inspired that story for you.
I got the idea when I was watching a really fantastic documentary about Ted Bundy's victims. And the only stuff I'd seen about Ted Bundy was mostly focused on Ted Bundy. And I had this kind of light bulb when I was watching it. Like it was really harrowing and scary, but it was also really emotional. And it felt like, man, these women were the superstars, or not the superstars, but these women were the heart of this story, and he gets the headline every single time. I want to hear from them what happened instead of seeing his face constantly. And I wanted to write a story that gave women like Ted Bundy's victims or other victims who got their lives and their voices cut short a storyline and put them in the spotlight instead of the big bad that we usually feature.
Yeah, and I also noticed in your books too, you have like those strong female characters and they're fighters and survivors. Is that something that when you're writing these books, you're like thinking about that, or does that just come natural? Or
Yeah, absolutely. That's what inspires me because that's the flip side of the anxiety that drives me to write and put myself in the driver's seat. That's the stories, and those are the people that keep me being like, yes, like evil isn't always the thing that comes out on top, even though sometimes it is on in real life. And those are the stories that really give me the chills in when I listen to the actual stories about victims and survivors in true crime. And so that's who I want to write about as well.
I always ask my guests too about like the writing process. What's the balance then for you? Like you have to correct, you're writing a thriller. There's certain things you need to have in them, but you want to entertain, but you also want to develop some good characters. How do you balance all that?
Oh gosh, that's a great question. That's a hard question. I think it just comes back to me to adding in layers as I write. You get out, or for me, I get out a draft as quick as I can. I block in the pieces I know need to be there with different twists and different character arcs and elements. And then I try to go back with it with fresh eyes and see who feels two-dimensional and who feels like, could I imagine talking to that person? Or if they told me their story or told someone else their story, would it get me in the heartstrings, or would I be like, huh, that sounds like something that a cheap newspaper article wrote about a very brief cursory overview of that person's experience. So just trying to get in there and make that, as cliche as that sounds, make that character's experience feel real and feel authentic to readers, many of whom might have had trauma or had something bad happen to them. I think a lot of women have. And so just trying to layer that in little by little as I go back and get to know the characters more with each pass of the book.
And do you like so it doesn't sound like do have like these big comprehensive outlines or
I do, but I think I do it weird. So I will start with a big comprehensive outline. I'll spend a week writing this amazing, detailed chapter by chapter character arcs, like, and then I will put it away and ignore it. I just want all of that in the back of my head for me to take from as I'm writing. But I feel like if I focus on it too hard, then I get a little bit too boxed in. So I do it and then I ignore it and then I write it and I count on my beta readers to tell me where I totally missed the boat.
Oh, I love to hear that because that's similar to my process too. I spend a lot of time on these huge outlines, but then I really don't really follow them. But it's in my head, so it helps me
Yeah.
in the story. So that's
Oh,
pretty
I
cool.
love knowing that. That's really cool.
You
You're
should,
not alone.
yeah, we're not alone. Yeah, I've interviewed a lot of people, and most people, either they go by the seat of their pants or they follow their outline very strictly.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, that's amazing. I love knowing that.
Yeah, so it's like, wow, that sounds familiar. Uh, and then I also like to ask about like the tools of the trade. Do you use like Word or Scrivener or something different?
I use almost exclusively Google Docs.
Oh, okay, nice.
They, I can make as many docs as I want for different things and then hide them away. And I know that I'll always be able to find them again. And then when I have my beta readers go through initial drafts, then I can make them each a copy and I don't have them on my computer. They're just in the cloud, which is a little bit scary. The cloud is still, I'm a millennial. Didn't I didn't grow up with the internet until I was in middle school. It's scary, but they're accessible and it's easy for me. So I go with Google Docs.
Yeah, we figure if Google goes down, then it's like we have a bigger fish to fry anyway. So
Right. Society's over anyways. It's
yeah.
fine.
And so do you when you're writing, do you write every day? Do you have like set hours? I'm just very very snoopy here.
I do. I find that for my personality, that helps me slowly but surely get this done. I write full time. This is what I do for my day. So I have set hours at my desk and then get my butt in the chair and tell myself that it's okay if they are bad words. I just have to write the words and then I can come back and turn on that editor brain and smooth those over at some point, which I will. So I find that if I go too long without writing, if I give myself a break for a day, then my brain gets like it falls over on its back and flails its legs and it's like, no, we have to catch up. We have to do too much now. And I just write every day and it helps me avoid those freakouts mentally.
Your background must have really been pretty cool though, because if you're doing ghostwriting and stuff, you must have. So you deadlines for you are like probably you can hit. They don't freak you out as much, maybe.
Yeah, it helped. If I always tell myself, yeah, if you could keep a deadline for somebody else, you can keep a
Yeah,
deadline for yourself. Do yourself that solid.
yeah. And when you were doing the other stuff before, was it usually always in the thriller world, or would you like whatever job came along?
It was not. It was a small enough publishing house in Utah, and they covered most genres. It was very squeaky clean across all of the genres, as you may imagine. But oh yeah, romance. There were a couple of thrillers. There wasn't any horror. There was women's fiction. So I didn't write a lot of thrillers or edit or ghostwrite, but everything else I got my hands in just a little bit. But that helped in some ways to see the commonalities of what made a good plot. Every genre has its buttons and its tropes that readers love to see, but what makes a good story tends to cross genres quite a bit. So that was fun to see that up
Yeah,
close.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense because yeah, we all trying to hit the please the readers no matter what genre, and then everything in the background is kind of probably the similar process, and the
Yeah,
marketing and all that's probably very similar.
right.
And so I'm going to ask you something too because when I was preparing for this interview, I was looking at your books, and I noticed on Amazon there's this tag that says "Best of Book Talk" hashtag. I'm like, okay, what is that? So then I went down that rabbit hole. And so, did you know about that? Were you surprised? Are you
I
making
was
videos?
surprised. I was really excited to see that, and I love my book talkers. They are fantastic. It's fascinating to see the book culture on Instagram versus TikTok versus Facebook. But I don't know why that one earned the best of book talk for versus the others. But I'm very excited to see it. So
Yeah.
Wish I had more insight for you on that.
Oh no, I was just kind of curious. I've been seeing those recently, and now you're like the first person I've interviewed that has that tag, that hashtag or whatever from Amazon. So I was like kind of curious about that. Do you do TikTok videos yourself, or do you?
I have an author account on TikTok, but it's not the most active thing that I do. I tend to be most active on Instagram. So I'm there, but I wouldn't say I was active.
That's so fascinating too, because I've interviewed like I interviewed Frida McFadden, and she blew up on TikTok too. And I asked her the same question, and she's like, "I don't even have an account." So it's like all these great book talkers out there that love these, find you, they love you, and then they start making all their videos for you. That's awesome.
It is. It's such a cool platform, and there's so many talented people on there, and I just love them.
And so, okay, so now I got sidetracked on that one. So now, I was kind of curious too. I always ask about like the research process. How much time do you spend on researching? Is it all usually online, or do you like, what's your research process like?
It varies a little bit by book and how closely I want to weave my story with something that inspired the book. I generally will do a lot of research up front, sort of with the way I do my outlines. I'll just tuck all of that information into my brain about whatever stories are really tugging at my mind that I want to weave elements into the book. So I'll read a bunch of, biographies or autobiographies or watch different true crime episodes about what happened if I'm researching different crimes for a book. And then I'll let the creative process take over and I'll tuck that aside because I don't want to rely too much on that. With my latest book, it was a little bit different. I did make the choice to tie that book as closely as possible to the real events that happened. It's None Left to Tell. It's based on the Mountain Meadows Massacre. And so for that one that happened very, very pre-internet, there were a lot of hard copy books that I have sitting on my shelf that just have miles of sticky notes and pages marked and dog-eared. And I think one of the books is just covered in pink highlighter all the way through. So that book took me down a lot more rabbit holes because it was so important to me to stay as true as I could to the story while filling in some of the gaps that I didn't, and nobody knows what really happened. But usually I'll just do a big bulk of research up front and then tuck that aside with my outline and let the creative process take over.
Oh, cool. Yeah. I wasn't familiar with that crime. Can you tell us a little bit about that one? The
Yeah, it
book
was.
and the real crime it's based on?
Yeah. So the book is based on, it's a relatively little known event that took place in southern Utah, where a group of settlers and religious zealots attacked a wagon train headed to California, and they killed 120 people, mostly women and children. And that crime was successfully covered up for quite a long time. And uh, some other groups were scapegoated for that crime. It was a lot of different groups involved. It's a multiple POV novel. So we've got the perspectives of the different people that were involved in it, including some of my ancestors,
Oh, wow.
unfortunately, who are not on the right side of that crime. But yeah, that's the cliff notes of it. It's sometimes hard for me to describe that one without giving away too many spoilers. But yes, a huge massacre that most people don't know about that
Yeah.
is pretty horrific.
So it's more like a historical thriller type novel.
It is, which kind of like how Ask for Andrea has ghosts in
Mhm.
it. I did never imagine myself writing something with ghosts. I don't usually like to read books with ghosts, and I don't usually love to read historical novels, but this one needed to be written and it just insisted upon it the way that Ask for Andrea did. So it is a historical, but I have loved seeing readers' responses to it who also have said, I don't usually read historical. This doesn't read like a historical novel. No shade on historical fiction writers, but it's I've been pleased with the reaction from thriller readers.
Yeah, and I started reading. I haven't finished, but I started reading Ask for Android, and I'm the same thing. I'm not a big on ghosts. Although one of my favorite books is Ghost Story by Peter Strauss, so it's kind of weird.
There's exceptions.
Yeah, there's exceptions, but Ask Andrea, I've been enjoying it a lot too. And is
Yeah.
that your latest book right now, or is it Gray After Dark? Which one's your newest?
The newest is None Left to Tell, so it just
Oh, okay.
barely came out in, gosh, is it already the end of October? So that was just a couple of weeks ago.
I know it's crazy
But
already.
before that, it was Gray After Dark. I know it's
Uh,
time is a construct.
uh, oh, okay, so that's cool. I have to go check that out for sure. Yeah, kind of. It's fascinating. All these the historical. Your latest one kind of reminds me of that. Sounds like Killers of the Flower Moon type of a scenario. It's kind of incredible. All these things are coming out now from history.
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen a couple of readers mention Colors of the Flower Moon when they've reviewed it. So that's when you say that. Yeah.
Yeah. And when I was reading Rundown Red, which I thought was so awesome and creepy and made me really paranoid, and it reminded me of when I was a kid, I watched a movie. It was Steven Spielberg's first movie, Duel. Have you ever seen that movie, Duel?
No, I haven't. There's so many of his that are
Like,
still on my watch list. That's shameful to admit, but I'm not.
it's before he was famous. It was like a TV movie with Dennis Weaver, and it kind of reminded me of that, like the road situation going on there that you have there.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'm gonna write that down and watch that. That one is based on something that happened to me and a friend from high school.
Yes, I was going to ask you. I
Yeah.
get the sense of that, like, well, a bit freaky.
Yeah, like our situation was not nearly that dire. Everything was pretty similar though, right up until the point that they got run off the road. We didn't get run off the road. We managed to get back down the canyon and we went one way and the car went the other, but they sure were intent on getting us to stop, and the men in the car had their hoods pulled all the way up over their faces so that
In,
we
in your situation?
yes.
Holy crap.
Yeah. And we were driving in a Volvo.
Wow.
The Volvo was part of that. So that yeah, it I just let the imagination run on what the worst thing might have happened in that situation. But yeah, there was some true details from that book that I was able to weave in.
Oh, wow, that's really scary. Say the least. Um, so what are you working on now? Any sneak peeks?
Yeah, I'm going to give a little bit more info about the cover and the title coming up soon on social media. So keep an eye out on that. But for now, I'll tell you it's based on a true story. And it's one of my favorite things to do is to take a lesser known story pre-internet. This one happened in the 70s in California, and it's one of the most audacious abduction stories that I had ever heard. And so I took that story and I modernized it because I kept thinking, could this still happen in a modern setting? A lot of crimes pre-cell phone, they kind of rely on that lack of people being able to communicate. So my mind always gets going when I hear one of those stories, like, could this still happen today? And if so, how? So, yeah, that's uh, not very much detail, but true crime based story from the 1970s that I fictionalized and put in a modern era. So I'm
No,
really excited about it.
yeah, that sounds great. And I love how your mind thinks like, oh, could this happen now? And then from there, kind of
Yeah.
like, oh, yeah, it's interesting to see that process.
Yeah.
Uh, and so I do have listeners who are aspiring thriller writers. So I always ask, any advice to someone who wants to write these type of books?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say the first thing is ties back to that first question that you asked. Read everything you can in the genre. Find out what commonalities there are between your favorite stories, and then start searching for your idea, what you want to focus your book on, and write. I know that sounds really oversimplified, but and maybe it only works for personalities like me that just need like a do this for 500 words a day. But I remember that really took the intimidation out of writing for me, is setting such a small goal that was like, oh yeah, I could write 300 or 500 words in a day, and that would take me maybe half an hour if I really sat there and just kept my fingers on the keyboard. And I could do that with kids in a different job. And I give myself permission to make those words not perfect. So I would say write and get the words on the page, and you will have a book in a year if you do that, less than a year, that you'll be able to actually work with and hone instead of an idea in your head. So I would say that's probably my best advice for maybe type A people like me. Set a goal that's really small and stick with it.
Yeah, I love it. I think like many writers, I read the Stephen King's On Writing book, and he had 2,000 words, and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna do that, and that was so depressing. I like put myself in a hole, and I'm like, wait a second, I'm not Stephen King.
Yes,
So yeah,
yes. For us normies, maybe 300 to 500.
Yeah, yeah. I'd never written anything. I'm like, oh, 2,000 a day, I'll do that. That was a disaster for me.
Yes, I would fail at that for sure.
And so where can the listeners find you? You said you're pretty active on Instagram. Where can they find you?
Yeah, so you can find me at Noelle W. Ihli author on Instagram. You can find me on TikTok, but I don't post very much on there. They're the same names, TikTok, Noelle W. Ihli author, and then Facebook, Noelle W. Ihli author. I'm the only Noelle W. Ihli, I think, in the world, which is a lot of pressure, but if you find one, it should be me.
Yeah, it makes it easier for the branding, right?
It does.
Yeah. So, all right, well, thank you so much. Really enjoyed talking to you, and really enjoying your book. So, thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
It was wonderful to talk to you as well. Great to be here. Great to chat. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. That wraps up episode 209 of Meet the Thriller Author. A huge thank you to Noelle West Ihli for joining us today and sharing the inspiration behind her gripping thrillers. If you haven't already, I highly recommend picking up her books. You won't be disappointed. If you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to like, rate, and review Meet the Thriller Author on your preferred podcast platform. Your support helps us reach more thriller fans and keeps the podcast going strong. And before you go, here's a quick reminder. Both of my psychological thrillers, The Basement and Imposter Syndrome, are available on Amazon right now. You can grab each one for just 99 cents or read them for free with Kindle Unlimited. So if you're in the mood for some psychological suspense with plenty of twists and turns, be sure to check those out. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time for more thrilling conversations with authors you love.